Hi everyone, it's Jono from Atom. Can everyone see me? I don't know. I always get really scared at this point. I'm just grabbing some equipment. So, hi everyone. Hi Nabil, how is everyone doing? Can everyone see me okay? Please let me know in the comments if you're having any issues. Welcome to this live. I will wait a few minutes just to let people join. Hope everyone has had a good day. Hope everyone's excited. What a way to spend a Thursday evening learning about exam tips and tricks for the 11 plus. Great, voice and video is fine, thank you very much. We'll get going at 6:30. We'll be going for about 45 minutes, just so you can plan accordingly the rest of your evening. So I'm Jono from Atom Learning. I've been a tutor for many years, more than I would like to admit, and I love teaching, and I'm excited to, that's very sweet, thank you for saying that, and I'm very excited to be going over some exam tips and tricks. I think, do you know what, like the 11 plus can be super stressful, and especially for such young kids, so I think it's important to be prepared for it, to kind of reduce any test anxiety. So that's what we're going to do today. It's coming up to 6:30, so let's start to get going. Before we get going, it would be great to know the age of everyone's children. What year are they in? That will help me kind of target the content a little bit better. Let me know, that would be great. Cool. I am gonna get going in a second. Sometimes when I'm a bit nervous, I sing. I'll try not to do that. Cool, let's get going. So this recording should be available after the lesson. I'm just gonna crack on and give a chance for everyone else to join. So let's do it. Exam tips and tricks time, let's go. So I'm gonna start briefly just by talking about what is the 11 plus. I'm sure all of you know what it is already, because you're in this group, this amazing group. So I'll quickly run through this, but the bulk of the session will be looking at exam tips and tricks, things you can do to help prepare your child for the 11 plus. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So as you probably all know, very quickly, it's just a selective entrance exam taken by year 6 pupils. There's 2 formats, GL and CEM, and it's used for selection into independent and grammar schools in England. So that's what it is. Probably no surprises, but let's move on to the test types. And this is actually where the tips start. I'm slightly in the way, but I think you know what this grid shows. But basically there are 2 exam boards, and they have very similar topics, okay? English, verbal reasoning, maths, and non-verbal reasoning. In the CEM, they're just structured differently. It's reasoning, maths, and English, basically. The first step is to just make sure any child that's taking the test is super familiar with the exam booklet. So that's my first tip, just because it's such a shame when a child works so hard and does so much studying and then does something wrong on the answer box. I think things to look out for, make sure if your child skips, I tell any student I work with to not skip questions. I just say make a guess and move on, because you want to make sure they fill in every box. And sometimes if a child skips a question with the intention to go back to it, they might say they skip question 3, they might answer question 4 in the question 3 box, and that just loses you so many marks. So I tell children not to skip questions, just make an educated guess and move on, okay? But familiarity with the test will be an important part of the any kind of preparation, okay? So again, with CEM, it's a bit more varied. So there's a lot of focus on knowledge and content. So I'd say if your child is taking a GL test, past papers, mock tests are going to be super, super important. With CEM, it's about learning the knowledge and the content. So mock tests are still important, but they need to have a really sound understanding of the key concepts, okay? So let's keep it going. So again, unfortunately, we are living in unprecedented times. So just do your research when you're doing your preparation. So some exam dates have been pushed back, which gives, a bit more time to prepare. So it's not always a bad thing. Some schools have scrapped the 11 plus altogether. So there may be subject interviews instead. See which schools you're applying for, get all that information in one place so you can have an informed practice, okay? Some exams might be fully online, not in person. So again, when it comes to practice, ensure your child is confident with both online testing as well as kind of written tests, okay? But the preparation will still largely be the same. The content which you need to learn and all that kind of stuff is the same. So just do your research, but preparations will largely still be the same, okay? So let's move on to the first bit where we're going to be talking about the first kind of few tips and tricks. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about a few different tips and tricks. I'm going to start with exam techniques, then I'm going to look at how to keep your child calm during exams, and then finish by looking at motivation, okay? I think motivation is a really tricky thing to get right. This might be one of the first kind of big tests that your child has had to take, and again, it's a very important formative part of their educational journey. So the techniques and kind of ways of working that get embedded now will become even more important, okay? So first things first, the first thing I would say is schedule formal practice time and consolidate through informal methods. What do I mean by that? It's just a kind of pretentious way of saying practice little and often, and again, do it informally. So scheduling specific time, it could start like with the exam the exam coming up, you might want to be doing 15 to 20 minutes after school, okay? And by informal methods, it could be things by sitting with your child and practicing your times tables, because they need to have a really quick mental maths for some of the multi-step maths problems, okay? So you want it to be informal and fun if you can. I know times tables aren't always fun, but if you can try and create some fun in the preparation, it will help make the whole experience even a little less overwhelming, okay? But scheduling formal practice time is really important. So every Saturday morning you might do 2 hours of 11 plus, or every other Saturday you need to do 1 mock test, okay? So little and often is the best way to keep your child motivated. Sitting them down for 8 hours and making them do past paper after past paper is not an effective learning strategy. Their brains will become saturated, they won't take it in, and they'll start to resent the practice, okay? Again, it's the 11 plus, the child's going to be 10 or 11, right? So they're going to have a short attention span. Don't try and push them too hard. Short, regular practice, really important, and a mixture of informal methods such as it could be doing like anagram solving, because that's important for the verbal reasoning section. It could be things like even like playing I was going to say playing Scrabble, which still counts, but maybe do something a little bit more intense in those 15 minutes. But short, regular practice, okay? So that's the first tip. Next, I would say that familiarization with the different styles of reasoning questions leads to improved learner outcomes, okay? So the reasoning section of the 11 plus is probably the most important to prepare for, because English and maths will be covered, a lot of it is covered by the national curriculum, so they will have covered it in school, they'll be familiar with it. When it comes to the verbal reasoning and the non-verbal reasoning, that's when things can get a little bit complicated, because it might be things that your child has never seen before. I remember when I started teaching this, I looked at some of the non-verbal reasoning and I was like, honey, what is going on? I have no idea what's happening. But they all have different ways of answering, and there are different exam techniques you can learn, so you always get these right. And practice really does make perfect with reasoning. So I would just make sure that your familiarization, particularly with the reasoning questions, because they will be things that your child hasn't seen before. Particularly with stuff like verbal reasoning, there are lots of codes questions, which are really, really weird, but they all have the same formula, okay? So once you learn about the different types of codes that come up in verbal reasoning questions, again, you'll always be able to answer those questions because it's following the same process, okay? So those are the first 2 exam technique tips. Next up, you want to be expanding the breadth of knowledge over time, okay? So again, in those 15-minute intervals when you're having your regular practice, or 30 minutes after school, or an hour on a Saturday morning, whatever it is, you want to be expanding the breadth of knowledge over time. So you might start with, let's say you're starting with fractions. You might simply start with, okay, what are fractions? Let's have a cake, we'll cut it into slices. Delicious, you get a snack, and you learn about fractions. That's the kind of learning I like, okay? What you then might build on that is like, okay, how do we add fractions? If I have half the cake and you have a quarter of a cake, how do we add those together? And then you can go along, you can then talk about what you need to do to the numerator and the denominator, how you add those fractions. So again, building up that knowledge in time, and kind of like, it's called like a spiralized curriculum. So you want to get progressively harder with that particular topic, okay? So expanding the breadth of knowledge over time. So doing progressively harder questions. It's really important to keep your child motivated. So if you start with the really difficult, like adding complex fractions and mixed numbers questions, that's going to dishearten your child. They're not going to want to go and do the 11 plus preparation. It's going to become a much bigger barrier than it needs to. So start with things that they are comfortable with and then gradually get harder. You need to kind of keep that motivational little switch, right? You need to challenge your child for sure, but you don't want to make it unachievable or unattainable. It needs to be manageable to keep them motivated. And revisiting topics, expanding that breadth of knowledge over time is the best way to do that. Linking into that point, stamina and pace. Keep it steady. Don't try and save everything for the last minute and do a big cramathon in the last month. That is not an effective learning strategy. And you also don't want your child to learn that cramming is effective, because that's not going to benefit them at GCSEs, A-levels or university, okay? Cramming is a much less effective learning technique, and there's tons of research studies that show this. Don't take my word for it, okay? So stamina, keep it steady, regular practice, and again, you can slightly increase the intensity as the exam comes up. So maybe you do a mock test every 2 weeks at the moment. Perhaps running up to the exam, it might be a mock test every weekend, okay? Or one on a Saturday, one on a Sunday. So again, stamina, keep it steady, keep it healthy, okay? That's the important thing. Also, as I'm talking, if you have any questions, just pop them in the comments. More than happy to answer questions as I go, okay? I'll keep an eye out. So those are the kind of 6 kind of key tips, I would say, and these are important things to consider if you're like coming up with a study plan or implementing a study plan right now. Just block off time, have it at regular intervals, and also schedule in breaks. So it might be like there'll be a week in summer you don't do any 11 plus preparation. So you don't want to get like practice fatigue, okay? So that's preparation and exam technique. These are a few of my favorite tips. You can tell I've been doing this a while when I have like a greatest hits collection of favorite tips. So my favorites are, the first one is to do timed practice. So many students I've worked with have never done a timed test. That's part of the exam skills that you need to practice. It's a pressurized event. They're not going to have as much time as they would get at home. So doing timed practice is really important. So timed mock tests, timed practice papers, all of those are really, really important. So they get used to the mindset of being in an exam. Like your child needs to know what to do if they can't answer a question. If they can't answer a question and they've never done a timed practice before, they might spend 5 minutes on a question they won't get right anyway. They need to know that, oh, I'm not going to get this right. I'm just going to make a guess and move on, because that's going to benefit me in the long term. I'm going to have more time to answer the questions I know how to do. So timed practice, really important. Mimicking exam conditions as much as possible. And it can be hard because you've got to be quite stern, which is something I struggle with. But again, timed practice, no talking, mimicking exam environment, super, super important. You want to almost like just mimic the exam as much as possible. Second, I've already hinted and alluded to this. Get familiar with that answer sheet or with online testing, depending on how the test is going to be distributed, okay? So when you're doing that time practice, print out a answer sheet so your child practices coloring in the little dots. I know that sounds silly, but like honestly, just doing it once takes away a lot of test anxiety as well, because your child's going to know exactly what to expect on test day. So that's something that's really important. Again, reading instructions carefully, trying not to sound too like patronizing here, but these are like, they might seem quite basic, but honestly the mistakes are being made again and again. Read instructions carefully. How do you need to answer the questions? How do you need to fill in your answer sheet? What is the question asking you? What do you need to do for each question, particularly for the reasoning questions, because they can have very sneaky little things in there. Like for the non-verbal reasoning, it might say the shape needs to be rotated somewhere in like the vignette that describes the question. So you want to make sure your child practices reading like critically and analytically when they're reading the question stems, okay? Read instructions carefully, know what you're looking for, particularly important for the verbal and non-verbal reasoning questions. Next up, tricky questions. Educated guess and move on. do not spend like too much time on a question you don't know. What I like to do with students is when I know, again, there's so much variation in an 11 plus test, you need to look up the test that you're doing, work out how much time there is per question. Because then I will say to a student, listen, like if you have 2 minutes a question, if you read a question and you've spent a minute on it and you know there's no way you can get to the answer in another minute, make a guess and move on, okay? Because then you get an extra minute to do a question that you'll be able to do. So having an idea of how much time you have per question is a really good way to teach children about pacing the exam, okay? And then finally, checking answers. Not always a priority. A lot of students sometimes want to check answers, but again, in this time-pressured environment, there's not always times to go back and check. So again, star questions that you guess. If you have time, come back and look at them again. But it's not always a priority, okay, to like check answers. You don't always need to factor it in, okay? So that is what we do. Those are kind of the first kind of few tips. Does anyone have any questions, perhaps relating to their child or their year group about these tips? Do let me know, and I will keep a little hawk eye on the little chat thingy. Anyway, let's keep it moving. So next I want to talk about how to keep calm, okay? Really, really important. I'd love to hear any techniques anyone uses with their children to help keep them calm in the run up to exams. Please let me know in the comments. It would be great to share some ideas together and talk about them. I can go through a few, but I would love to hear from you as well. Just getting into good habits is really, really important, okay? So making sure your child is getting enough sleep, at least 8 hours, is really important. Scheduling like regular exercise and walks is just good to decompress and help get rid of anxiety. Exercise can definitely help students calm down. Spending time in nature, going outside. If you, for example, on a Saturday, if your child is doing a mock test on a Saturday, maybe schedule some nice outdoor activities for the Saturday afternoon so there's time to decompress. And emphasize that, you know what, this is an exam, but it's not everything, okay? Yes, it's important. Yes, you need to practice, but it's still important to take care of yourself and have good self-care. So sleeping enough, eating healthily, lots of fruits, fish if they eat fish, because, you know, lots of omega-3. I hated fish though as a child. I would never eat it. So again, pick the tips that work for you, okay? So these are just some ideas of how you can help keep your child calm, okay? Some children really like meditating. There are great apps as well. Whatever works for you, okay? You know your child best. One thing that I like to do with students that I work with is just teach them some breathing techniques. So if they are stressed in the exam, they just have like a fail-safe mechanism that they can use to help them calm down, okay? So I always say like breathe in for 4, hold for 8 seconds, and then breathe out for 8 seconds. So it's like breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, hold for 8 seconds, and then breathe out for 8 seconds, okay? So and you know what? I was feeling a bit nervous before, now I'm not. It worked! There are lots of different variations of breathing techniques. That's the 4-8-8 is what I use, but again, sometimes it's just about having something that you can use in your like Swiss Army knife of anxiolytic tools, okay? So those are some tips on keeping calm, okay? So what we're gonna do next, oh great, let's have a look, sorry, I was scrolling. So I just saw a few questions. Just before we move on, I'll answer some questions. I wasn't scrolling down, which is why I wasn't seeing them. Kind of embarrassing when I work in technology. So yes, Atom's VR section does cover both GL and CEM exams. When you're doing the mock test, you can also select GL or CEM, so you'll see the appropriate questions. UCASET is an independent school entry test. When should you start time tests? Great question from Bhavna. So I think when you starting time tests, honestly, I would do it sooner rather than later. And you don't have to do it in like a big, scary way. It can be like, okay, we're gonna do some maths practice now. Here's some questions. You've got 5 minutes to have a go at many as you can. Like again, start small and then, like I said earlier, increase the breadth. So then you do a whole maths section timed and then you do a whole test timed. Sometimes it can be a good idea to just give your child a test, like a diagnostic test, when they first start preparing for the 11 plus, so they know what's coming. So again, when I first start working with a student, I just give them an 11 plus test, let them have a go, and then we work through it together, but I make them do it in exam conditions, because that way they know what they're working towards. There's no surprises coming. They're like, oh, okay, I know what happens in an 11 plus test. So I would say start time practice as soon as possible. Can be a good idea to do a diagnostic 11 plus test right at the start, and then gradually build up. So start doing timed questions, then start doing timed sections, and then start doing timed papers, okay? That's just a good way of like leveling up the difficulty. But really, really good question. And I took the exam, I took lots of different entry exams throughout my life, for med school, for high school, all sorts. So a bit of a test expert, if I say so myself. Right, so next I'm going to talk about some resources that can be really useful for your preparation. Past papers, again, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Past papers are super important. There are free GL and CEM papers online. You can find them with a cheeky little Google, so really important to do those. Is part of the school selection process an interview? If there is an interview, make sure you do some practice with your child. Just practicing doing interview questions, practicing doing just answering very common questions. Again, you should find some examples on the school's website. Problem solving games can be really, really good. Like logic puzzles, crosswords, all those kind of things. They can just be good, free, fun resources. Learning apps are really, really good. Tons of good learning apps. Like there's one I use called Peak. Again, I no affiliation with them, but I really like it. It's just like a fun brain training app, and it's free. The ads get a bit annoying though. But again, lots of different learning apps you can use to just kind of even mental math learning apps are really, really good. You can just find them on Google, and practicing mental math is really, really good. YouTube can be an excellent resource for free 11 plus practices and free maths resources as well. And then mock tests, custom practice. If you wanted to use something like Atom, unlimited mock tests and custom practices are really good resources to help really take a granular approach to learning, okay? So those are some examples of some resources you can use to help out. Again, Atom does have a free YouTube channel with lots of different math problems on it, creative writing problems, all sorts. So check that out if you want some free resources to help with your prep. So next I want to talk about granular diagnosis. Now this really is the key to long-term success. I hope I'm not blocking the text, but it's hard to tell. It's a new setup, which is really fun, but I sometimes don't get the positioning right. So taking a granular approach really allows you to boost learner outcomes quickly. So again, if you do use Atom, you can use the parent portal to identify strengths, but you can also do this yourself by looking at the practice papers. So what you want to do is, if your child you want to get to a point when it gets close to the exam, you really want to hone in on the areas they're finding difficult. So if they do if they're doing maths tests and they always get fraction questions wrong, stop going over ratios or whatever, because they know it. Go over fractions. There's going to be a little bit of a barrier there, because inherently, if you're not good at something, you're not going to want to do it as much. So be really, really motivating and really supportive, but you need to set specific practice on areas that they are weak in, okay? So they always get fractions question wrong, do tons of fractions problems. They struggle with vocabulary questions and comprehension. Make sure they have a vocab journal. Make sure they are doing lots of reading. Make sure you're practicing vocab flashcards with them. All those sorts of things, okay? So taking that granular approach is really what I think elevates students from one level to the next, okay? So that's something that you can do. You can do it yourself, or if you want to automate it, you can use all of the tools on the Atom dashboard as well, okay? So if there are any more questions, let me know. I've worked out how to scroll, which is great. I love scrolling. So I'll keep an eye on the Q&A. But next, I'm just going to talk about my final kind of tips and tricks about strategies to motivate children, okay? And I think this is important not just for the 11 plus, but it's also about their learning in general, okay? These are my 4 favorite. There are lots more. These are just the 4 that I found worked best for me and the students I've worked with over the years. Also works with my nephews. So we'll go through these one by one. First things first, follow their lead, okay? This is actually done based on some research called the Goldilocks effect, which starts in infancy. Children are going to be more motivated by things that they are interested in, okay? And you can apply this in a more academic context, okay? So let's say your son really likes ballet, okay? You could find books for him to read about ballet and then do comprehension questions based on that text, okay? So following their lead just helps you, it helps engage them in their learning, so they have a degree of ownership over it. So it's like, oh yeah, I love ballet, I want to read this book. Oh yeah, let's answer questions on it. It's a good kind of like gateway, if you will, for starting them. It's a good gateway for them to start like taking ownership in their learning, because that's really what you want to push for. So that's the first strategy. Next is to elicit curiosity, okay? Children are curious. I remember when I was growing up, I would always be like, why is that there? How is that made? Why is that there? And it would drive my parents insane. But eliciting that curiosity is really, really important, because especially children that behave in like surprising ways, they might drop something on the floor and then like they'll throw it and kind of see what happens next, okay? So again, that's more kind of in infancy, but starting to explain things that they are curious about is a really good way of kind of motivating them to learn more, okay? So for example, let's say you got a new goldfish, right? And there's a cute little goldfish bowl. You then might be like, okay, so like Sandy the goldfish is living in her cute house, yeah? There's like some seaweed, there's the cute pebbles on the bottom, she's having a great time. How could we work out the volume of water we need to fill Sandy's fish bowl? So again, you're eliciting that curiosity of like, they love their pet goldfish. They want to make sure their pet goldfish Sandy has the best fish bowl, right? So let's make sure we get the right amount of water in. How can we do that? Well, we need to work out the volume. Volume is length times width times height. And then you can work with your child to measure the length and the width and the height of the goldfish bowl. You can do the calculation and then measure the right amount of water, okay? So eliciting that curiosity is a really useful way of like engaging them in their learning, okay? So next up, this is probably my favorite one, and I think the most important one. Again, all opinions are my own. Praising the process, not the outcome, okay? So when a child gets a question right, that's great, and you want to congratulate them. But the most important thing to put emphasis on is the process. How are they getting to the answer? Get them to explain their thinking. How did they get there? And even if they don't get the right answer, if they're doing all the right things to get to the answer, that's what you want to be saying well done for. That's what you want to be praising, okay? Because the problem is that when we praise children just for their intellect or just to getting the question right, it leads to performance orientation. And then they will, if they then aren't getting something right, they won't want to do it. They won't be motivated to go do something they always get wrong. They're just going to want to do the questions they get right because they always get praised for it. So if they always get fraction questions wrong, when they're doing their working out, praise the process of, oh, you're doing exactly the right thing. Yes, you need to double the denominator so that it's the same on both fractions. Great. So that's what you want to be doing, praising their process. You kept trying even though you didn't get it right. That's really important. So really putting emphasis on their effort, okay? And emphasizing that like getting a question wrong or falling short is an opportunity to learn, okay? So that's how we can elicit curiosity. And then finally, social interaction. They're amazing, like social interaction is a really good way to boost learning and also make learning more fun. I always used to revise with friends, I absolutely loved it. Made it much more bearable, okay? So there are also lots of apps to facilitate learning. Atom is one of them. We have lots of live lessons where there's lots of interaction with students directly. So that's a great way to introduce some social interaction to learning. And yeah, so social interaction, really important for learning. Lots of research supporting it too. Okay, so that is social. That's some tips to motivate children, okay? So just to finish off and kind of reiterate the importance of practice, again, this just shows that when a student is using something like Atom, the student score increases really strongly in the first 6 months when they're using both our home platform and a school platform. So we have a free school platform called Prime, so all schools can use it for free, and then Nucleus is our home platform that has a subscription, and again you can see a 65 increase if you're using both, only a 40% increase if you're just using one, okay? So again, evidence-based, we love evidence, it helps. Okay, plug over, I promise. Okay, so thank you very much for coming along to this live. I had a lovely time. Do we have any final questions before we end the live? And also, do people want the slides? Do you want me to share the slides afterwards so you can have them? Please comment if you do. I will pause dramatically for a few seconds in case there are any questions. Otherwise, I will start to wrap up. Dramatic. No, I can't see any new ones. How many genres of books should you read? I would say as many as possible, to be honest. I realize that's not a helpful answer, but sometimes the comprehension questions could be on non-fiction. So stuff like, it could be stuff on like dinosaurs, or it could be stuff on like history. So non-fiction is really important. Persuasive writing, so speeches is really important. Like reading over speeches, reading over like dramatic monologues. Poetry can sometimes feature. And students find poetry really, really hard, so it's a good one to practice. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Fiction is really important, but they should be reading lots of fiction anyway, both inside and out of school. So that's really important. But yeah, I would say as many genres as you can, but the key ones would be like non-fiction, like the kind of like, I would call them more like boring texts, but some people like them, like the non-fiction, like reading about the history and like I don't know, animals and stuff. So that's really important. Even getting them to read stuff like, I always read your cereal box. What's on your cereal box? How are they trying to persuade you to like eat this cereal? Persuasive writing really important. So like advertisements, speeches, all really important. Poetry, fiction, and then also reading some drama can be really good. We all love a bit of drama, but reading over plays is really, really important because there can be some questions specific about like how plays are laid out, okay? And that also factors in with the national curriculum. So the difference between Prime and Nucleus: Prime is Atom's school platform, so schools can use Atom Prime for free and gets access to some of our questions. Atom Nucleus is the parent platform, so parents can use Atom Nucleus to get even more questions and even more like granular details on their child's performance. What are they really strong in? What do they need to improve in? They can use Nucleus to see that. Nucleus has a 5-day free trial, so you can have a look for yourself. Do as many mock tests as you can in those 5 days would be my advice to see if you like it. So if you have any specific questions on like how to tell if your child is doing well, I would get in contact with the customer support team. They'll be able to provide you much more information and can look at your child's stats as well to give you some more insight. But there will be on Atom, there'll be a comparison on how your child is doing compared to other Prime students and national averages. So you will be able to investigate. Okay. So, any more? I think that's okay. So thank you everyone for coming to this live. I had a great time. I absolutely love talking about this stuff. I picked the right job. So thank you very much for coming. If you do have any questions, I will keep an eye out on the comments over the next kind of day or two, and I'll respond to any that come up. I'll do my very best to. Thanks again for coming. I'll share some links after this live. So keep an eye out, and thanks very much. Unless there's anything else, I'm gonna dash off. Thank you so much for coming. Hope it was useful. Let me know any feedback, and it's a pleasure as always to be here. Thanks to the 11 Plus group for having me back. It was really, really nice. And thank you to Saba and the whole team. Really, really appreciate it. Hope this added some value and hope it was useful. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and see you soon. I'm going to end the video. Bye. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, I think I need to click